Great. Well, thank you, Ali, for launching us off with such energy. I'm not sure I'll be able to maintain the level of energy that you've already given us. Um, what I want to do is talk about the relationship between becoming a holy church and how we participate in worship. So, first of all, I want to use this time to throw a pebble in the pond to see what ripples come out and have a bit of a conversation about worship, and perhaps those ripples will be of a kind of wavelength that resonate with you. I feel as though there's a lot of what I'm saying resonates with what Ali has already said. And it's been encouraging already over the past day to just pick up on what's been said at the conference so far. And it could be that those ripples hit rocks as part of our conversation and form new patterns. And I think that's what I'm hoping to learn by our time together. So when we talk about worship, I'm going to start the conversation in Acts 2:42. So some of the resonances, I think, of what you said, Josh, about the apostolic as opposed to the genius in your introductory remarks. So how do we relate to the apostles' teaching? What does it mean to be in the apostolic tradition? Talking about fellowship, so koinonia, and I mean, this is where the participation has to happen when we're gathering in worship. Koinonia, that sense of what does the community have in common? And when a community gathers in worship, how do they work out? Well, how are we working that out? In the breaking of bread, so reference to the sacraments, and in our prayers, so talking to God as a real and powerful agent. So the pebble that I just want to put in the pond, my hypothesis is that, and I think this is one of the things that you were saying, Ali, is that our inherited tradition or traditions and cultures of worship influence us so much that we cannot imagine what it's like for somebody with no church background to come into a new worshiping community, a new thing. Now, like Ali, I love the tradition. I love, I love being apostolic and staying in the apostolic tradition. I love all that we have, but I think to talk about the imaginary, to emphasize again, I think it's really, really hard for us to imagine what it's like for somebody to come into a worshipping experience when they've got no church background. I love also the references that we've been making to Mission Shaped Church. I think 20 years is a good period to say, well, the report came out and was debated in 2004. What's happened over the past couple of decades? As a reminder, Mission Shaped Church was saying, yes, we know there are de-churched people, but what about people who have never been churched? That is our focus and our aim. So what I'd like to do is bring before you this description, this diagram that I think came from Michael Moyner and the team, the Fresh Expressions team that was set up nationally. I think Steve Croft was the first person to lead. But this diagram sort of came out very early on, around 2005, 2006, I think. And it's been, it described what Michael Moyner saw happening for pioneers. And it became very popular, and I think it became a model, which refers to your talk. And you probably know it well. I'm not going to go through and explain it. But the key thing is that worship happens in that fifth circle. That's the idea. Worship happens after exploring discipleship. So it happens after the community has been formed and built. And I want to sort of test this model with you, and in a way, I wish I was part of Paul Bradbury's conversation, because I think he's probably got the answer to the questions that I'm asking you, because he's developing a new model. I think I'd like to know in the conversation, how much is this still happening? Because as Will pointed out last night, the resource church model is putting worship first. The church, the congregations I was part of planting in Amsterdam were worship first models, and it was a different context, and there was good reasons for doing that. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying if we're reaching unchurched people, is this still what is happening? Because I think this is very difficult to do. Personally, I think the sacramental boundary happens in that fifth circle. So as people begin to explore discipleship, as catechism happens, you only need to have your first sacramental worship, I would argue, when people have come to faith and they know what discipleship is about and are ready to make that commitment, which, as we were hearing in the last session, for some people is a commitment that comes with a very high cost. It was great to hear Ed yesterday. I'm sure it went on the same because he was sharing it publicly, and it's going to be on audio. But he became a Christian at the age of 16 in Surrey, and he was kicked out of his home. His mother didn't want him to. She didn't want him to Bible bash him. That's what she said. So he became homeless at the age of 16 whilst he was still at school. Incredibly high cost of becoming a disciple, which we don't often encounter, particularly you don't expect that from the kind of background that he came from. So the question is, with the joy of this cultural and traditional baggage that we have, the Christian leaders tend to introduce worship quite early. And my suggestion is that as soon as we do that, we're setting that new worshiping community in a direction that predetermines an awful lot, and that begins to exclude, which is what you're saying, the possibility of other people wanting to join that community. So are we really delaying that worship experience to the latest possible moment? So there's three traditions that I'd like us to, or that I think are relevant just to start the conversation off, really. One is around common worship. The second is around what's happening in Resource Church, the worship first model, and how we choose music. So I'll try and whip through these fairly quickly because I think it might not be very contentious. But after 20 years of trying to develop a mixed ecology of church, I think what Will showed us last night is that the parish has got nothing to worry about. Nobody needs to worry about saving the parish because the parish has endured, as an ecclesial form, it has endured repeated attempts to develop new ecclesial forms, which is what the legal the legislation that came out of the Church was enabling. And by and large, all pioneering and fresh expressions of church and resource churches, they're all happening within the existing ecclesial forms of parish. So, and that is a demonstration that is similar to what's happening with common worship, is that our inherited tradition that we express in liturgy is so strong that we automatically are just ticking the boxes of, well, haven't got a greeting, profession. We've got right reading, so we've got haven't got a creedal statement. If not a creedal statement, then perhaps we can sing it. And are we intercessing and is there a blessing that uses the new form if the priest is doing it or not if a lay person? So I love common worship and it feeds me. But what I'm saying is, can we deconstruct that? And as we turn to Sam Wells and Stanley Hauerwas, I think we're saying that we can. My question is, does liturgy necessarily lead to growth in discipleship and holiness? Does participation in liturgy necessarily lead to it? I know it does, but are there ways that we could use our liturgical traditions more creatively and imaginatively that could facilitate that? I wasn't following General Synod closely, but I was just aware of that debate about the behaviour of people in PCCs that came up for discussion. And that would seem to indicate that you have people that have been going to church services for a long time, but their behaviour is appalling. So suggests that there might be ways of doing things differently. I was talking with an archdeacon recently who was visiting a church in vacancy, and she said the one thing she said was, they didn't, this is a small struggling multicultural church, so they didn't have gospel reading. You kind of think, if that's the only feedback you can give after 20 years of mission-shaped church, we are not getting the message across. Resource Church. Well, what I love about resource churches and large Anglican charismatic churches, what I see happening in one of the churches that I regularly worship in, is we're seeing lots of students coming to faith, and what draws them into the life of Christ is the koinonia, is the fellowship that they enter, which is characterized by this invitation to be part of a live music event, which is of high quality, and that draws out what's happening inside them, their emotions, in a way that they don't have a safe space to do that in other contexts. So it's great, but it is an attractional model of church that has strongly defended values and culture. And if a non-Christian is going to join that community, they have to conform to that culture and those values. And that is in opposition to a pioneering model that is trying to develop the kind of thing that you're talking about. Similarly, because John is here and talking about Anglo-Catholic church planting, I think the form and ritual of Catholic worship creates a safe space, but it's an alternative space. Go to a church in Mexico or Spain or wherever, and you've got that, you're entering the heavenly realms. It's all covered in gold, and you're entering an alternative space, which is a safe space. But that's a different model to this model. So entering into that, very often that you're a participant, but you may the question is, how much are you participating in those sorts of worshipping communities? How much do they address your personal walk with Christ, your own discipleship, your journey towards holiness? And then thinking about how we choose music, and I think you touched on this, Ali, really. I think every Christian leader has got their golden age of music. There's a ripple that resonates, isn't it? It meant a lot to me when I was 23. And it's always got a special place in my heart, sort of thing. but that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying, how can it's neutrality, how can we create a space that forms new music? So I think, we're locked into this soft rock vibe. And yeah, it's great, there's nothing wrong with it, but there's a lot of music genres out there, more than ever. There was an ordinand at this student church, or church that was an evening service the student go to. An ordinand, he led worship, but he's in a heavy metal band. And he ramped up the worship just slightly towards his preferred genre. And I loved it. I thought, we don't hear this. There's a rawness there in heavy metal. That expresses some of the emotions that we see in the Psalms, for example, that we are not getting through soft rock vibes. So I just think we're not being adventurous and imaginative enough in trying to step away and reevaluate these three areas. So here's just a little bit of theology, which drives me. The story of the emerging church, in my perspective, told in the New Testament, is a journey from one culture to a very, very different culture. So for me, what it means to be apostolic is when the gospel moves from one culture into another culture. So we have the Jewish, Aramaic, Hebrew-speaking culture of Jesus and the disciples. What do we find? Within the space of 50 years, we find that the gospel is not being expressed. We haven't got the New Testament in Aramaic. We haven't got it in Hebrew. We've got it in Greek, and it's written largely for a Greco-Roman world. So within the space of a few decades, we have in the New Testament an example, I think, and this is what I really believe in the apostolic tradition, this is what I think really is. We have the example of a dynamic process of moving from one culture to another culture. And Mission Shaped Church was building on breaking new ground, a report from we've had 40 years of church planting and a church planting movement in the West, and I'm not convinced that we're moving into another culture. With the life of the church is picking up in the culture. We're just trying to retain what few largely white middle class graduates are still in the Church of England from an Anglican perspective. And I think Bishop Eleanor was saying this yesterday morning. She was saying the power is in the crossing of the culture, this dynamic move from one culture to another. So, where should we be going? How long have I got?
5 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes.
Yeah. Okay, great. So I've loved drawing on Stanley Hauerwas and Sam Wells. In the same year that Mission Shaped Church was published, they published the Blackwell Companion to Christian Ethics, where they wanted to take ethics out of the lecture theatre into the life of the church. And if you looked at that compendium, they look at all the different elements of liturgy and they kind of reframe them. And out of this, Sam Wells develops his whole sort of theory of improvisation in worship. And I think Ali and I agree that he doesn't go far enough, and we want to go further in allowing worship space in pioneering communities to evolve every single time you meet for worship. So what that means is you don't ask Tracy in advance to lead the intercessions. You don't have a rota for hate rotors. You don't have rotas because you don't have people preparing in advance because the Spirit is preparing people in advance before they come and gather. So it doesn't mean to say that you're not preparing a service, but you are creating an event as people gather. So what that might mean is in the greeting. So the greeting isn't the Lord be with you and also with you. The greeting is we'll have a chat with each other and allow that to develop into koinonia, which is, well, how's the week been? And talk to each other. And where the week's been difficult or where the week's been something to celebrate, you begin to share that. So, I'm sure you do it in training sessions, 2, 4, 8, 4. Gather in twos, then two pairs share together. Those 4s gather as an 8, and then out of a group of 8, you might just want to share with one thing out of that group with the whole of the gathered community. How do we embody that fellowship that was there in Acts chapter 2? Out of those things that people are sharing, how do the scriptures engage with those issues that people are facing? I mean, you've got enough Christian knowledge in the room to say, I think didn't David talk about something like that in the Psalms about having a sleepless night? Let's allow the community to share the scriptures that are relevant for those people and the issues that they've brought that week. Allow the intercessions to deal with that. Is Frida unable to put enough money in the electric to keep the lights on? Well, why isn't the collection related to her needs for that week? I'm just trying to argue that I just don't think we've been pioneering enough. We haven't been experimental enough. We haven't been bold enough to let go of ticking the liturgical tick boxes within the space of that gathering. I think that, and we say, well, we'll do that in home group on Wednesday, but most people in lots of contexts can't wait to home group. I don't understand why we're not using our primary weekly meeting space to do our discipleship together. Sam Wells talks about one of the implications of improvisation is what we call over-accepting. If you're an impro actor, it doesn't matter what line you're fed, you build on it, you use it. And we see this in the Bible, in all the improvisation stuff that's on TV and radio. And Sam Wells's principle is that God has given us everything we need to love and to worship Him and to fulfill His mission. We're not lacking anything. We don't need anything. It's all there in the people that come together. We don't actually need SDM. God has given us everything we need, and I would argue the worship leaders are creators, curators of bringing all those assets together. This is what asset-based community development is. We bring all those resources together as we gather together and seek to develop our community life together.